Arizona Territory, 1879. The summer sun was just beginning to dip behind the jagged red rocks of the Dragoon Mountains when she pressed a blade to his ribs. "Hand over your wallet," she said, voice tight, breath fast. Her knife shook. Perrin Slade barely blinked. He had been hauling fence posts all afternoon, shirt clinging to his back with sweat, dust caked up to his knees. He had seen rattlesnakes stare colder than this woman's eyes, but none had looked so desperate. He glanced down at the blade, nothing more than a rusted kitchen knife. Then up at her face. Young, maybe 22. Dust-smeared cheeks, pale scar along her jawline, hunger deep in her eyes. "I do not carry a wallet," he said calmly, "but I have beans on the fire." She blinked. He moved fast, one fluid motion. He caught her wrist, twisted just enough to knock the knife from her hand, then stepped back. She stumbled, fists up, but he did nothing more than raise his hands, palms out. "You want dinner instead?" he asked. She stared at him like he had spoken Apache. "What?" I said. "I have beans." "Coffee too, if you want it. You look like you have not eaten in days." Her fist stayed raised. He tilted his head toward the little fire crackling beneath a bent mesquite tree. "You could have knifed me any time in the last minute. You didn't. That tells me you are not a killer." "Just hungry." She hesitated, then glanced toward the fire, his voice softened. "Come sit. You can leave after or stay if you want." She watched him for another long moment. Then, slow and wary, she stepped past him and sat cross-legged by the fire. She did not say a word. Perrin ladled beans into a dented tin bowl and handed it to her. She ate like someone afraid it would be taken back. No words, just the scrape of a spoon and the crackle of fire. He poured her a cup of coffee, slid it over. "Name's Perrin Slade." She glanced up, eyes narrowing. "You going to turn me in?" "No," he said simply. She looked at the cup, then back at him. "Sophronia," he nodded. "Sophronia what?" She hesitated. "Cade," he did not press. Just sat back and drank his own coffee. After a while she licked the spoon clean and set it down. "Why didn't you fight me harder? You looked like you needed food more than I needed a hole in my gut." She blinked. "You are not very smart," he chuckled. "Probably not." They sat in the growing dark. Coyotes barked far off. The fire popped. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I was not going to do it. I just thought maybe if I scared you, you'd drop something. I have not eaten in 2 days, lost my horse north of Tombstone, got robbed. I was trying to get to Bisbee. I heard there is work." Perrin nodded. "There might be, but it is rough country to cross on foot. You will not last long without water or a place to sleep." She looked at him, guarded. "You offering more than beans?" "I have a spare bedroll. You can sleep here tonight." "Why?" He looked at her seriously. "Because someone fed me once when I had nothing. Paid for my train fare west after the war. I figure I owe the world a few kindnesses." She shifted, eyes not quite meeting his. "I do not owe you anything. I am not asking for anything." She looked at the fire for a long time. Then finally she said, "Thank you." When the moon rose, he unrolled the spare bedroll near the fire and tossed her a blanket. "Get some sleep. We will figure out tomorrow in the morning." She lay down, still watching him like she did not trust the peace to last. Perrin did not press. He just sat by the fire until her breathing slowed into sleep. He stayed awake a little longer, watching the edge of the desert, listening to the wind. He could not explain why he had not turned her in, why he had not walked away. Only that something in her eyes had struck a chord, something raw and lonely and fierce, and he knew what it was like to stand alone. Maybe that was reason enough. The next morning she was still there. Perrin handed her a strip of jerky and a biscuit. "There's a spring east of here. I head that way every few days. If you want, I will take you. You can wash up, think things through." She nodded slowly. "All right." They walked under the rising sun, the land stretching wide and empty around them. She did not talk much, but she stayed close. At the spring, she knelt to drink, then splashed water on her face. Perrin turned away, giving her privacy. When she came back, her hair was damp and her expression thoughtful. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "Have for 3 years now." "No family," he shook his head. "Just me." "And the land?" She was quiet a moment. Then, "I had 2 brothers. They died in Kansas. Fever took one. The other got himself shot for stealing a horse." Perrin did not ask more than that. They walked back slowly, heat rising. That night she helped stir the beans. Sat a little closer to the fire. Her hand brushed his once when she passed him his bowl. She pulled it back fast. He said nothing. She looked at him. "You really live alone by choice?" "Was not always alone. Lost someone. It stuck." She did not ask who. Another silence passed. Then she said, "What were you before this?" "Union soldier." "Then ranch hand." "Then I bought this plot cheap and made it work." She looked at the fire. "I worked a saloon once, not as a girl, just washed dishes. Then the owner's wife got jealous, fired me. After that I got by how I could." He met her eyes. "You do not have to tell me all that." "I want to." He nodded. She looked down. "I never meant to hurt you. I know." She looked at him again, longer this time. That night she did not unroll the spare bedroll. Instead, she sat close by the fire with him until the stars came out. Then she whispered, "You sure you do not mind me staying another day?" He turned toward her, his voice low. "I am not in a hurry for you to leave." She smiled, small but real. The first smile he had seen on her. And in that moment, Perrin knew something had shifted. This was no longer about kindness or debt. Something was beginning. Something neither of them had planned, and he was not going to run from it. 2 days later, Sophronia was still there, though she hadn't said whether she meant to be. She'd taken to rising before sunrise, brushing out the tangles in her hair with her fingers and walking the edges of Perrin's land. She didn't wander far, just far enough to be alone a while. That morning he caught sight of her standing by the rows of corn he'd planted in spring, squinting at them like they were a puzzle she meant to solve. "You ever worked rows before?" he asked. She didn't turn. "No, but I can tell you planted too close. Roots'll fight each other come August." He stepped beside her, arms crossed. "That's so." Was a boy back home, had a patch behind his house. His father showed me what to watch for. Told me plants grow like people too close and they start choking. He looked at her, the way her hands stayed loose at her sides, not hiding or guarded. "You want to try setting a few rows right. You can dig with a hoe or your hands. Don't matter to me." She turned to face him, unsure. "You don't mind?" "I wouldn't have asked." She nodded once, then followed him to the shed. He handed her a hoe, the handle worn smooth. She tested its weight like she was remembering something buried. By mid-morning, she was knee-deep in dirt, pulling up the crowded shoots and setting them apart with care. Perrin worked nearby, fixing a rail that had buckled in the last windstorm. They didn't speak much. The quiet was easy. That evening she cooked. He watched her from the doorway, arms braced against the frame, as she stirred the pot over the fire with a steady hand. She'd found some dried chilies in his stores, crushed them in her palm and mixed them in with the beans. Her face was calm, focused. "You cook often?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Only when folks let me. Most kitchens don't want girls who ask questions." "What kind of questions?" "Why the flowers kept near the stove. Why the good knives stay locked in a box." He chuckled. "That's not the kind of trouble I mind." She gave a short nod, then tasted the broth with the tip of a spoon. "Need salt?" "You got any?" He went and fetched the tin from his shelf. When he handed it to her, her fingers brushed his, firm and quick. She didn't pull away as fast this time. That night they ate on crates outside, the sky overhead streaked with early stars. A breeze moved through the dry grass, carrying the scent of ash and mesquite. After a while, she said, You ever think about leaving? He shook his head slowly. No. I've gone too far to make sense anywhere else. She rested her spoon on her knee. I used to think about it all the time, running east maybe, pretending I was someone people didn't look twice at. You still thinking it? She hesitated. Not as much. He looked at her, saw how the wind pushed her hair out of her face and the way her jaw set when she was being honest. You'd be hard to overlook, even back east. She glanced at him, a brief flicker of something unreadable passing through her eyes. You saying I'd stand out? I'm saying you already do. She held his gaze, and this time she didn't look away. Later, as they cleaned the pot together, she said, I could help with the chickens tomorrow if you've got any. He nodded. I've got 6. The coop's behind the shed. All right, she said. I'll handle it. Perrin watched her disappear into the shadows of the lean to where her bedroll was laid out. She hadn't asked to stay again, and he hadn't asked her to go. The fire died down to embers. He sat a little while longer, listening to the quiet. He didn't understand yet what they were building, only that it was steady and slow and real. Like fence posts sunk deep in dry earth, holding firm against the wind. By the 4th morning, she was waiting by the coop before Perrin stepped out the door. The hens were already scratching in the yard, and she had a bucket in one hand and straw tucked under her arm. He leaned against the doorframe, rubbing sleep from his eyes. You planning to take over or just making a strong case for staying? Sophronia didn't smile, but her eyes lifted to meet his. Depends on who's asking. He stepped down the porch stairs. The man whose chickens you're tending. She turned and crouched, checking for eggs with practiced care. Then I'm just earning my keep. Perrin nodded once and went to the corral. The bay gelding needed water and one of the rails had come loose again. When he straightened from refitting it, she was standing nearby, arms folded, watching the horse. That one yours? She asked. Bought him in Wilcox 2 years back. He's meaner than he looks. She tilted her head. What's his name? Don't name animals I might have to shoot. She didn't laugh, but her eyes flicked toward him. You always like this? How's that? Quiet, dry. Half a mile from a joke. He glanced at her over his shoulder. You always this blunt? If someone feeds me, I figure I owe honesty. He gave a soft grunt and turned back to the rail. She stepped closer, eyeing the fence. You ever think about running cattle? She asked. He paused. Land's too thin this far south. You'd lose more than you'd raise. She nodded like she'd already guessed that. I knew a man in Pecos tried it, thought he could graze through winter, ended up splitting firewood for a boarding house. Perrin looked at her again. You been to Pecos? Passed through. Worked a freight wagon for a while. Driver let me ride in exchange for help loading barrels. I saw most of nothing between San Angelo and Lordsburg. He rested a hand on the top rail. You've seen more country than most men I know. Didn't have the luxury of staying put. She turned and walked toward the shed, the hem of her skirt brushing the dirt. Perrin watched her go, then bent to hammer the nail home. That afternoon she brought out a battered tin box she'd pulled from the corner of the lean-to. What's that? He asked. Thread, needle, and buttons, she said. Your shirts look like they've been fighting barbed wire. He looked down at his sleeve. They've lost, mostly. She settled on a stool and began working at the cuff of one of his clean shirts. Her hands moved with sure rhythm, the needle flashing in the sun. You learned that from your mother? He asked. No. The woman who ran the charity house in Abilene kept a switch in one hand and a sewing hoop in the other. If you couldn't stitch a hem, you didn't eat. He didn't reply. She kept her eyes on the fabric. I didn't mind the sewing. I minded the silence. Girls would vanish some nights. No one ever asked why. He stood quiet for a long stretch. The only sound was the wind sweeping across the porch. You don't have to tell me more, he said. I know, but I want you to know who I am. He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. I already do. She looked up, eyes steady. No, you don't, but you're not afraid to look. He didn't flinch. You're not hiding. She nodded once, then bent her head to the shirt again. That night the sky cracked open with heat lightning. No rain yet, just the dry shimmer of light across the plains. They sat under the porch roof, both holding tin cups, watching it flicker. She leaned back against the post. You ever miss the war? He turned his cup in his hands. No, but I miss the men I knew in it. They understood things without talking. She looked out into the dark. I miss my brother's voice. He had this way of telling a lie so sweet you wanted to believe it. They didn't speak after that. The storm never broke when they turned in. She paused near the door to the lean-to. You sleep light? She asked. He nodded. Then don't be surprised if I cook breakfast first tomorrow. He met her eyes. I'd be grateful. She gave a quiet nod, then stepped into the dark. He stood a moment longer on the porch, one hand resting on the doorframe, watching where she'd gone. He didn't know what to call this thing building between them. It wasn't sudden and it wasn't simple, but it was growing, not like fire, like roots, quiet, steady, meant to hold. The morning came warm and windless, the kind of day where the sun climbed fast and shadows clung low. Sophronia was already outside when Perrin stepped down from the porch, sleeves rolled, boots damp with dew. She'd gathered 3 eggs and stacked kindling by the stove, her braids swinging down her back as she moved. You always work this hard before breakfast? He asked. She didn't glance up. I don't like sitting still unless I'm bone tired. He reached for the bucket and poured water into the basin outside. You're not the only one. She stood, brushing her palms on her skirt. I saw a rider on the North Ridge earlier. Didn't come this way, but he slowed when he passed the marker stone. Perrin's posture shifted, not tense but alert. Was he army? Too dusty. Looked like a drifter, maybe with a pack mule. Had something heavy slung behind the saddle. Could be hauling pelts. Could be hauling trouble. She nodded once. Didn't seem in a hurry, just watching. He poured himself a dipper of water and drank. I'll check the fence line later. If he comes back, I'd like to know before he finds the barn. She leaned a shoulder against the shed wall. You always keep your rifle by the door. I keep what I can count on close. She studied him a moment, then looked out toward the ridge. You ever think about hiring someone on, just short term? Perrin wiped his hands on a rag. You offering? I've done more for less. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking, you stay on, it won't be for pay, not yet. But you'll eat and you'll have a roof. I'm not asking for kindness. You're earning something steadier than that. She didn't answer right away, just nodded once and stepped away from the shed. That afternoon they worked side by side in the vegetable rows. Sophronia cleared weeds with a practiced rhythm, while Perrin strung wire along the new posts he'd set. The sun beat down, and neither spoke much until the work eased. She wiped her brow with the side of her arm. You ever been married? He kept his eyes on the wire. I was close once. Before I came west. What happened? She needed more than I could give, and I wasn't man enough yet to try. Sophronia didn't press. She knelt and pulled another stalk loose from the soil. You? He asked. She shook her head. No one's ever asked proper. A few tried, but not for the right reasons. He looked at her then, really looked, not at the lines of her face or the way she held herself, but at the steadiness in her. You'd make someone a hard match. She raised an eyebrow. Hard how? Strong. Someone have to keep up. Not just follow. Her mouth twitched in something close to amusement. You trying to flatter me? No, just telling it plain. She stood, brushing dirt from her palms, and looked at him across the rows. Then I'll tell you plain too, I don't want to be followed. I want to be stood beside. He nodded once, slow. That makes 2 of us. They didn't speak again as they finished the work, but something shifted in the air between them, like a weight had been passed, not dropped. That night she didn't ask to share the porch. She simply sat beside him when the last of the light faded. The lantern hung low, casting gold across the dust at their boots. He passed her a tin cup of water. "I've got an extra saddle in the shed. Leather's cracked, but it'll hold. If that horse thief's sniffing around again, I'd rather you weren't on foot." She traced the rim of the cup. "You're offering me a ride. I'm offering you a choice if it comes to leaving fast." She nodded. "Appreciate it. I don't want you to leave." She looked at him, steady and unflinching. "Then I won't." The wind stirred the cottonwoods near the wash, dry leaves whispering against one another. He reached out slow and sure and rested his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. "I never figured I'd want someone here," he said. "I never figured I'd find someone who meant it." They sat like that for a long time, neither speaking, the silence full of things understood. Inside, the fire burned low. The land stretched quiet around them, and for the first time in years, Perrin felt the shape of something lasting settle in his chest, not from duty or loneliness, but from the quiet, clear fact of her hand in his. 2 weeks passed without another rider on the ridge. The days settled into rhythm: fence mending, water hauling, tending rows before the heat pressed down. Sophronia rose early, Perrin worked late, and between them a quiet life began to knit itself together, stitch by careful stitch. One morning she found an old canvas satchel behind the shed, half rotted and stiff with age. She brought it to the porch where Perrin was oiling his saddle. "This yours?" she asked. He looked up, squinting in the sun. "No, belonged to the man who had this land before me. Left it behind when he died." "What was he like?" "Didn't know him. Bought the plot from a man in Wilcox who'd settled the estate. All I got was a deed and a half-burned barn to rebuild." She turned the bag over, unlatching the rusted buckle. Inside were yellowed papers, a cracked water tin, and a letter with the ink faded near gone. She unfolded it, lips moving silently as she read. Then she handed it to him. He scanned the contents. "Looks like he had someone in Missouri. Was writing home about building a house. Must have never finished it." Sophronia sat beside him. "Funny how people make plans like that, like the world's going to wait." He folded the letter and slid it back into the bag. "Sometimes it does. You just have to outlast the waiting." She studied him, then looked toward the dry hills. "You ever think about building more, not just fences and sheds, something bigger?" He kept his hands busy with the saddle. "I've thought about a house, one with real windows, a roof that doesn't leak when it storms." She leaned back against the post. "If you built it, what would you want in it?" He paused. "A place to hang my coat, a floor that doesn't creak, and someone who wants to stay." The silence that followed was still and full. That night, when the moon rose pale over the hills, she brought out 2 tin plates and a cloth-wrapped parcel. "I traded with a Mexican woman passing through," she said. "She had flour and lard. I made biscuits." Perrin sat across from her at the small table inside the cabin. The biscuits were heavy and uneven but warm. He took a bite. "These might be the best thing I've eaten since '68. She laughed, just once, and shook her head. "They're dry. They're yours. That's enough." She picked at the edge of her plate. "I used to think I'd end up in a place where no one knew me, just drift until I didn't matter." "You matter here." She looked up, eyes clear. "I know." Later, he found her by the spring. She was washing the cloths from supper, sleeves rolled, hair unbound and hanging loose. He didn't speak, just stood nearby, hands in his pockets. When she finished, she turned and walked to him without hesitation. "I need to ask you something," she said. He nodded. "I don't want to be a burden or a guest. I want to belong to something, to someone." "Do you understand what I mean?" He reached for her hand, still damp and smelling of soaproot. "I do. I don't have anything to offer but what I know and what I can do. You've given more than most ever do. You've given peace." She blinked, then smiled slow. "Then I'd like to stay, for good. If you'll have me." He drew her close, hands resting at her back. "I want that, I want you." She leaned into him, forehead to his shoulder. "Then let's start building that house. With windows." They stood there a long time, the sound of water running over stone, the sun sinking low. A month later, they married beneath a cottonwood tree near the spring. No preacher, just words spoken plain and true, with the land as witness and the sky wide and blue overhead. Sophronia wore a dress she'd stitched from a bolt of calico traded in town. Perrin wore his cleanest shirt, the one she'd mended. They built the house slowly, adding walls between chores, raising the roof beam by beam. One room, then two. A porch with a bench, windows that faced the morning light. By winter, the house was finished. The cabin became a storehouse. The lean-to was taken down. They kept chickens and grew beans, traded in Bisbee when they needed salt or coffee. Sometimes Sophronia would sit at the table and draw floor plans for rooms they might add one day. Perrin would read aloud from old railroad papers or books left behind by travelers. They didn't need much, just the land and each other and the steady life they built together. In the evenings, she'd rest her head on his shoulder while the fire burned low. He'd hold her hand, rough and warm, and listen to the wind outside. And though the world beyond their valley never stopped turning, it never pulled them away. They were home, together, always.